Tarek and Yusuf. And I'd like to first start by acknowledging that we at VAF are grateful to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We hope that wherever you are situated, that you also will take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous communities that have taken care of Turtle Island since time immemorial. So to get to your question, the Vancouver Asian Film Festival, like Asian Heritage Month, is celebrating 25 years. 25 years ago, when I started the festival, I really didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I didn't see anybody like myself anywhere in media, on film, on television. And when I did, I always tell this story. When I was younger, on my family's little black and white television, I actually thought Elvis and Cher was Asian, or else they looked more like me than anybody else that was on television. And that is sort of telling of the time that we grew up. And so when I went, a friend of mine took me to the Seattle International Asian American Film Festival, and I saw Sandra Oh open her film there with Runaway. And that was the first time I saw in a theater somebody who looked like me up on screen, and everybody was cheering afterwards. And I thought, there's got to be something like this in Vancouver. So I came back, I had a short film, and there wasn't anything. And I thought, okay, let's do this. How hard could it be? But as Jasper knows, organizing grassroots events is very time consuming. But there's a passion and there's a group, and we really over the years we built a community of filmmakers and storytellers. And we really wanted to give a platform and a venue for people of Asian heritage, Asian Canadians, to tell their stories authentically and to tell them from their perspective with their voice, not through a filter, not through gatekeepers. And so when we talk about storytelling, VAF, one of our core beliefs is that storytelling is one of the most effective tools to combat racism. Storytelling and film and television and media have the power to change people's minds and attitudes and perspectives. And through sharing our stories and sharing our lived experiences, we can help people understand where we come from, and we can understand where others come from. And I think that is a very important piece of it. So I wanted to just go through some of the studies of why representation and storytelling is so important in film, television, and media. Because popular media can have negative impact on what the white community's perceptions of people of color are. A lack of contact between racial groups can lead to greater reliance on media stereotypes when formulating ideas about people outside one's race. So there are communities of people who have no contact. So all they see is what's on television on their screens and what they consume. So it's really important that our stories are there, that we're crowdsourcing our stories and putting it out there. And right now we are running a project called Reclaim Your Name. And it's really about people from the Asian community who had to feel like they had to adopt a westernized names to fit in. And we're asking them to tell us their story. And if they didn't take on a westernized name, did people mispronounce it? Did you always feel this uncomfortableness of telling people your name? So we really think that that's a great place to start, because how easy is it because whenever we meet somebody, we start with introducing our names and unpacking what all that means. So I've reached out to many people in the Asian community, and they always say to me, well, I don't think my story's that interesting. I don't think my name's that. And as I talk to them, their stories are so interesting, and there's so much depth and richness to it, and believing that our stories matter. That's part of what VAF does, and that's part of what Eliminate Hate wants to do, is to start these conversations, very baby steps. We're having this giant conversation about how to approach racism, but I think we all just need to start talking to each other and start finding commonalities and finding where we can exchange our stories. So that's one of the things that VAF does. Another point is that when we do see BIPOC images, it's often negative portrayals, which can adversely affect how people of color see themselves. There's studies that shown prolonged television exposure predicts a decrease in self-esteem for all boys and girls of color, and an increase in self-esteem for white boys. These differences correlate with the racial and gender biases in Hollywood, which casts only white men as heroes while erasing or subordinating other groups as villains, sidekicks, and sexual objects. So a lot of these stereotypes and the way we're presented gets put into our own minds and into other people who have never really experienced or exchanged, had interactions with communities of color. So it's really important what we see and hear. Another one is that the erasure of people of color in media communicates to the BIPOC that they don't matter, that they are not valued, and they don't exist in society. So part of what we need to tell and talk about, especially to government officials, people who are funding productions and the screen industries, our stories need to be funded. Our stories need to be told. We need to break down that barrier of language and that white colonial view of what is art and what is valued. So that's something else that can be done. And there is, so I'll cut it short, but there's so many racist images that have a cumulative effect on society. And we can't dismiss the media's differential portrayals of racial groups as mere entertainment. We need to seriously look at their impact on our youth and also the greater society, because storytelling media now has become, as we talked about in the first panel, what we're hearing and seeing on online is affecting all of us, and we need to take it back. And how we take it back is to get our stories out there, is to tell our stories, get out there, be on social media, like things, go to Asian Heritage Month, see the artists, support them, get our voices, because as a community, we have not developed that muscle memory of speaking up and speaking out. What VAF wants to do is build and give opportunities and create pathways and ways to uplift each other, so that when somebody speaks out, you don't have one voice, you have many voices supporting and amplifying and repeating, because only then we can crowd out the other hate with uplifting. Okay. So I just wanted to say, I always go to my parents. As immigrants, watching them is always very inspiring and disheartening at the same time. There are things that, as immigrants, and from the old school, that I don't agree with, but things that they did to survive that I really uphold and want to emulate. So, but for people that on screen, that's something that VAF does, is that we didn't have role models. We didn't see ourselves put up there. And I'm doing this documentary that's been taking me 8 years, but a lot of people in a lot of generations still say Bruce Lee, and even you said it, Tark, because there hasn't really been anybody there to be there. And I interviewed somebody and he said, you know, it wasn't until Bruce Lee that Asian men could be strong and sexy and, you know, forceful. And who has come? Jackie Chan, yes, and other people, Jet Li, but there really hasn't been somebody North American here that we could aspire to as a community. Sandra Oh is amazing. That's somebody else I would say. She's really led the way. We talk about, and in this, you know, in these last few years, the Asian community has come out to speak up. Daniel Day Kim, Tamlin Tamita has been an amazing friend to VAF. She inspires me, and she was one of the first young Asian women I saw on screen that, you know, that I could say there's some, we're being represented. But I think we need to do more. I think there's much more that needs to be done in terms of role models. I think there's a lot we as a community we keep our head down. We don't want to be, you know, seen. We don't, because people who make waves get there, you know, get stomped on. So that's part of the community, something that we have to get over. We need to celebrate. We don't just to be critical. I was on on CBC, they were talking about the Kung Fu cast, and there was certain like criticism that they didn't represent everybody. Well, they don't have to, you know, like just because we have that one Asian character or one Asian cast, they don't have to represent all of us. Just the fact that we're seen as human with different and not all the same. We're not monoliths, so that these stories about us should not be just, you know, represent all of us, and we have to have all these different personalities. I think starting with the one and adding to it, Crazy Rich Asians is not a lot of Asian communities' reality, but being seen, Farewell, that's another one. Like, and having Chloe Zhao talking about, you know, just doing work. So we just need these people to do and be accepted for who they are and what story they want to tell, not be ghettoized with their storytelling, but also when they do want to tell a story about the community and bring somebody who looks like them up on the screen to give them that opportunity. So I say that there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work. I think we all need to help them and support them. And then there'll be a lot more role models for our generation and our kids to come up and to say, look, I can do that too. Look at so-and-so doing what they're doing. Sandra Oh being a lead in a series. Amazing. 20, and like it took how many years? Because I started the film festival 25 years ago. She was on the screen for her first runaway. And only a few years ago did she get her own lead. So think about how long that took. These are the kind of things that we need to push forward. And I can't say that more anymore and emphasize it anymore. We all have to be putting, you know, putting our eyeballs on them, putting
That's
our consumer dollars against them, advocating. We all have a responsibility.